of that, it's like having a conversation about today's events is like stepping on a landmine any way you turn, right? So
Yes.
if you say the wrong thing out of your mouth, it's a trigger word or a trigger idea, right? And the walls, it's like these big, like big iron walls. They just they close shut like this, and you're not talking anymore. You're just arguing, and so
All right. Today I have with me Michelle Stiles. Michelle, welcome to the show. I'm very excited to talk to you. To give you a little brief introduction, you wrote a book and it's called One Idea to Rule Them All: Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. Now, that's in itself, the title's fascinating, and I'm very fascinated by the topic. You're also a physical therapist, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit too. But first, let's dive into a little bit of why you wrote the book, how you got from being a physical therapist to thinking about these things and ultimately writing the book.
yeah, right. What a great. First of all, thanks for having me. Look forward to the chat and joining your audience. Yeah, it's a anomaly, right? Like, how did somebody who's involved in healthcare get to be investigating propaganda? And so it started about 15 years ago, and I was looking at a couple of things. I saw a local anthill of corruption is all I can say. It was like I grew up in this sort of idyllic little small town. You could ride your bike everywhere, and I just didn't see that the evil could have corrupted like something. So I mean, again, it was fairly small, and I thought, God, what the heck must Washington be like? I mean, it flows downhill, right? It starts with the
Right.
maximal power. They go after the big time power, not the little things. And so that kind of started me thinking. And then there was Barack Obama's election coming up, and I just thought, regardless of who he is, you're supposed to have more qualifications than he did. I mean, he was a junior senator, right? And so I started thinking, well, what's going on? And I was not really a political person. I did not like watching the news. And maybe I slept in social science class. I don't know, but all of a sudden I started, asking some questions, and so it was like, I'm going to study, propaganda, and it was just like, oh, okay, and I started with Creel, George Creel, and his book, How We Advertised America. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
You bounced him around, okay, and so this book has this sort of fist pumping, look what we did. I mean, how we advertised America, right? And so it smacks you in the face. It's like, wait a minute, you either have good reasons for going to war or you don't, right? You don't
Right.
sell a war. And so, I just started looking into this, and I would learn something, and then I would say that, relate it to a friend or a neighbor or something like that. Like, do you know this? And it was like this history that I'd never really came across. And so I started, just pulling on the bibliographies, and because that's how I kind of learn, right? And moving me into different things, and it ended up being the first book that I wrote. So that's how it happened. And it was over the course of like 10 years. Just by wasn't by any means, you know, a full-time job. I was just kind of
Right.
looking. Yeah.
So do you think so I one of the things that I find myself doing repeatedly is going to social media to check out what everybody's saying about current politics and stuff like that. And it's I'm being overwhelmed by propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
These over this weekend specifically, for those of you who are listening in the future, um, we had struck Iran over the weekend, and there's been I've been inundated with propaganda from both sides, left, right, and center, and it's absolutely insane the
Mm-hmm.
amount of propaganda that's coming. And for it's weird not seeing it from the federal government. It's very weird not seeing it from the federal government. They're not. It seems like they're not feeding it, but they're
Mm-hmm.
not trying to help it either.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think that social media has exacerbated our the propensity for American propaganda.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's hands down, right? But I think of it like this. First of all, it goes much further back, and I'd love to read you a quote. Just remind me to come back
Absolutely.
to it. We won't do it now, but I think really like prior to 1996, that's when Fox News started, right? So we had the mainstream media and everybody's drinking from the same stream, right? It's starting to tack left and the people on the right are disaffected. So they're like, okay, so when Fox News kind of breaks apart from that one stream, people are like, yeah, I'm getting my concerns addressed over here. And so you have this like bifurcation of the public mind. And I believe actually it was intentional, right? So that's since 1996. That's a long time, right? It's over 30 years or so, right? And so from that time you have it's like it's not like the stream is running parallel like this. It's like getting further apart, right? And so they're feeding, it's almost like this side has different facts than this side does, and so we can't even talk to each other, right? The distance
Right.
over here now is this big, so that dialogue is actually impossible because we're not talking about the same universe anymore,
Right.
the same reality, if you would. And so that's huge. And so then social media just feeds in that with memes. Memes are just like, yeah, oh, that's how I believe. Yeah, that's how I believe. These
Right.
self-reinforcing things that are so minimal, and they're not a conversation, they're not a dialogue, they're not actually intelligent rationalizations, but just little pats on the back saying, you think correctly, and
Right.
you're
Yes.
orthodox.
I want to hear my opinion coming out of your mouth. That's
Right.
yeah.
It's confirmation bias, a other way to talk about it. But anyway, so I take, and so because of that, it's like having a conversation about today's events is like stepping on a landmine any way you turn, right? So
Yes.
if you say the wrong thing out of your mouth, it's a trigger word or a trigger idea, right? And the walls, it's like these big, like big iron walls. They just close shut like this, and you're not talking anymore. You're just arguing. And so, anyways, I want to read you this quote if I can. Do you know who Graham Wallace is? Has your audience, we talked about him?
No, I don't know who he is. I'm not sure if the audience knows who he is, but go ahead and fill
Okay.
us in.
Okay. So Graham Wallace is a um, important guy at the turn of the century, 20th century, that is. He's a Fabian socialist, so he's hanging around with Beatrice Webb, Bertrand Russell, H.G. Wells, all those guys, Huxley's, right? He's intimately related to the London School of Economics. And anyway, so I found this quote for him in Human Nature and Politics. By the way, he mentored Walter Lippmann about a year over there, right? And he came back and wrote Public Opinion. So if you were familiar with that piece, but anyways, here it goes. It's a little long, so, and I'll try to paraphrase it a little bit. Popular election, it is said, may work fairly well as long as those questions are not raised which cause the holders of wealth and industrial power to make full use of their opportunities. But if the rich people, there's the qualifying phrase, but if the rich people in any modern state thought it worth their while in order to secure a tariff, legalize a trust, and he goes on to a couple other things, nothing would prevent them from spending that money. Okay. And if they did so, there's so much skill to be bought, and the art of using skill for the production of emotion and opinion has so advanced that the whole condition of political contest would be changed forever. No, was changed forever for the future. Okay. And then no existing party, unless it enormously increased its own fund or discovered some other new source of political strength, would have any chance of permanent success. Okay. So again, if the rich people, there's so much, thought it worth their while to secure anything in society, right? There's so much art and skill to be bought for the production of emotion and public opinion that it's a done deal. They've won.
Right.
They have the money, they have the skill. So I hit that quote after my first book, at the end of my first book, and I went, oh, honey, you don't know nothing.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because I had gone up to World War I. And this, okay, so here's the date. What do you think this was written?
Let's say 1938.
Okay, 1908.
1908. So I was 30 years off, but that whole period of history is kind of, it blends together, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was stunning to me. It was like 1908. Now, see, he's talking about something that's already, I mean, it's not, isn't something they just figured out a year ago. I mean, he's
Right.
so sure of it. You know what I mean? This technology is likely 2 decades old, at that time. And so that's my second book. And I just started pulling on those strings because I said, wow, I got to find out. I mean, this is a pretty authoritarian guy
Yeah.
coming from the UK. I think he knows what he's talking about. And if he does, I have to learn a lot more. So that's my upcoming book is going to go delve into that. But, so what I try to do is take people back because, again, we have like American propaganda for most of our public consciousness is an oxymoron,
Yes.
right? It's like, oh, it doesn't exist, right? We're a democracy. We have a free press. And so the only time, and they did a really good job, plastering that word to the enemy in World War II, such that coming out of World War II, there's nothing to see here, folks.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Abracadabra. We erased the word, plastered it to the enemy, and now there's nothing but free blue skies.
Yes, and
And
I'm actually a huge fan of American propaganda. If it's so, the American propaganda that I like is things like movies, Hollywood, um, anything like uh, the so there's videos. The Department of Justice and the Department of War, they do these videos to showcase and highlight their equipment, their ladies and gentlemen that do the tasks and all that good stuff. I really kind of enjoy that kind of stuff, and I'm actually a big fan of American exceptionalism. And
okay.
it blows my mind that we can know these things. We can know that we're being indoctrinated. We can know that we're being propagandized, and most of us don't care.
Um, hmm. Yeah, that's not good though.
Right.
I don't think, right? I mean,
I don't
it's
think it's good either. But what my what I tend to believe is that we we latch onto that propaganda as long as it agrees with our current way of life. And
mhm,
and
mhm,
there's a lot of things like in today's politics, they twist things around so quickly
mhm.
to fit the narrative and stuff that we will buy into pretty much anything nowadays. But
Right.
we're generally aware that it's happening, and that's where it gets a little mind bendy for me that people can be aware this is happening and still buy into the bullshit.
Right, right. I mean, here's one of the things that kind of is so you think about truth in any sort of a context. Like, so maybe you have kids or something, and they neighbors are invited over, and like a week later you find out that something was broke, right? And how do you find out? So, but you've also had a cleaning lady in, and somebody was a dog sitter for you, whatever, and you're like, who broke the X, and you're asking the kids, and it may take a month, it may take a year, and somebody finally fesses up. You don't know, right? Like, truth
Right.
does not immediate. There are lots of reasons for concealing truth, right?
Right.
In everyday life, but certainly much more so geopolitically, right? When there's power and lots of money at stake. And so you like, but we're like been programmed to think that 24 hours after something's happened that we could have the actual results, which is just, fictional, right? It's just
Right.
really
Yeah,
does
we're
not, it
actually
doesn't,
living through it right now.
right. And then think about it in a court of law. Like, how long does it take to get to the bottom? Like, you're going to have people that take the witness stand, and maybe the first person that takes the witness stand, you're like, well, I believe them. And then the next person comes and you're like, no, I believe them, because
Right.
they get cross-examined. And so truth is a really hard thing to um, get a hold of. And we've become really truth dumb and believe anything right after
Well, I
the
think it's
fact.
truth has become subjective. I really think truth has become subjective. And in order to be objective, you kind of have to take yourself out of the situation, which a lot of people can't do.
Yeah. But the thing, okay, so like, for example, in World War One, people really reacted to the $6 million worth of propaganda that was made to get them in the war. And remember, they
Yes.
reelected Wilson because he kept us out of war. That was his slogan, right? So when we got in really late, and there was like $6 million, like we weren't even in there over there for a year, right? And then they they allowed people to sign up volunteer, and then they ended up having to have a conscription because nobody was signing up for their great and wonderful war. So people were not, they weren't happy to do it. Okay, and I just lost my train of thought. Where was I going with this?
We were talking about subjective truth and objective truth.
Okay, yes.
And
Okay, thank you. Okay, so you fast forward to, like, I think it was the 1930s. You have the Nye Committee that's getting to the bottom of the role of the munitions companies, and and they had sometimes profited 600% and 1,000%, and the role of the bankers in terms of the loans to the allies. And so, right. And then you have
yes,
these really respected historians, that Charles and Mary Beard, who examined the Nye documents and said, based on those documents, you could go back and check what was written during the war, and you would come to the conclusion that the American people will learn next to nothing from the newspapers during an event
yes,
like that. Okay,
yes,
so it took a decade, 2 decades, even in that case, for real uh, causes to kind of be unearthed, and some different ones than the pretext or the narrative that got spewed all over the papers and such. So so people really have to remember that. And what I'm not about sound bites, because we have too many sound bites. What we need is more synthesis. We need the forest for the trees, right?
yes,
So,
yes,
like, I'm all about trying to connect small dots here and there. You don't, like, people don't have time to do an exhaustive, like, I just was studying this for 15 years. Well, nobody has time for that. You know what I mean? You can't read 150 books to get up to speed. So I'm trying
absolutely.
to, like, lay out principles and patterns from history. So you can't expect to see truth. We won't know the truth about this Iranian thing.
Right.
Um, for 10 years later. So we have to say, like, regardless to whatever both sides are saying, which is what you kind of opened with, is that, yeah, I'm a little skeptical either way. We'll see, but if you know the pattern of history of how, like, elites get us into these wars for their own reasons, then
Right.
you would just say, well, yeah, I doubt this is for what the pretext is. You know what I
Right.
mean? I doubt it's
Right.
about that.
Well, I think so. With the current stuff going on, you had mentioned 1996, and you had mentioned also, 15 years ago when you had started, viewing these things. So you you studied World War One, you studied World War Two, and did you ever come up with like a consensus that World War One is basically a continue, or World War Two is basically a continuation of World War One?
Right.
What I actually believe is the Cold War is a continuation of World War Two.
Yes, I would
Where
agree.
we're at now is World War Three.
Yeah.
And so, in my opinion, there's a lot of things and a lot of nuance that goes into this that people just don't see, and
Mhm.
it's prepackaged to give it to. When you say that we won't know currently what's going on for about another 10 years or so, that's still going to be obfuscated from the truth. And
Mhm.
it's going to be a subjective truth. It's not going to be objective, because there's, by that time, there's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and the winner gets the accolades to the winner gets baked into the system,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
so, and the people that question that narrative or that winner's truth get relegated down the chain of prestige. They get mocked, censored, and deplatformed, and whatever. So yes, so really it is, you know, the okay. So when you go back and you look at the early 1900s, and that's I did a deep case study on the age of reform, right? And to see if that was really what it said it was, right? And you realize then, as I'm reading all these different period pieces of people talking about the communication system at that time, um, it was already really sewed up, right? Like the
Yeah.
elites owned it, right? And the thing is, the penny press started in 1833, and before that, you could pretty much compete. You could put a printer, you know what I mean? But it was $1 million investment at that point.
Right.
So now so the dailies became big, and gobbled up the city or metropolis sort of market, and you still had little rural printers on the outside.
Right.
But as this and then they pretty much, after the muckrakers had consolidated all the magazines, they had the publishing houses, they had the speakers bureaus, and they had a system that had been being put in place to sell things through since the penny press, right, all the way through. And I kind of go over that in my book. Is they went from selling commodities to events to destinations like the West, right, events like the World's Fair, and extensively, and they do the same thing each time they move over to another sort of, and then by the end of the century they're selling presidents. So they use it to get William McKinley elected, and they realize, oh, this is great, we can get rid of the boss system now because it was messy. Okay, it caused a lot of corruption, whatever. So we'll get rid of that, and we'll move into this much more seamless system of using publicity to get our guy in. And
Yes.
so you start seeing, and then I have like another chapter where there's like, oh, okay, so then they start to use this to sell ideology. And have you heard of the Wilmington coup?
No.
Okay, 1898 Wilmington coup. The state of North Carolina just did a like kind of mea culpa in 2006 about this thing that happened, and it's kind of long. We won't get all into it, but essentially they're using publicity tools to market white racism and to destroy the fusion government, which was an alliance between the blacks, the freed blacks who had a vote, and the poorer white people, okay, to get the government back into the richer whites that wanted to rule the South. And so, you know, and they're also using it to sell a banking system at that time. So, right, they wanted the Federal Reserve, and they created 2 years before, they created the National Association, National Citizens Association for Sound Banking, National League, Citizens League for the Association of Sound Banking. Anyway, they spent $250,000 or $500,000 at that time, which is 1911, is a big deal. And
wow,
right,
that is a lot of money.
So this is a front group, and you have letters and papers from the people in Wall Street in the Northeast saying they're going to be Midwestern bankers that run this because people still trust them.
Now, essentially, this is what we would call an NGO today.
Yes, right. So
Yeah.
so we put like, people would think I'm self-interested if I promoted this. These are the Wall Street bankers, and so we're going to put our desires in the mouth of somebody else, which is called a front or third party position. And so and they execute a play-by-play, very sophisticated propaganda campaign, publicity campaign to sell sound banking. So they simplify the message. They actually change the message based on targeting for different regions of the country. So you have segmented messaging even back then, right? You're thinking, wow, I thought that was just current, but they were doing that then. They would they had a speakers bureau, so they had chapters in every state, and so they were co-opting local authorities that would then, that the people trusted. All right. The same thing. They did that in the Minutemen, right? The 4 Minutemen in World War I. They co-opting local authority because their authority is trash and nobody's going to believe them. And so, anyways, $500,000 National Citizens League for the promotion of sound banking and use of a front group. So you start to see these tactics at the early decades of the 20th century and toward the end of the 1900s. Or 1800s rather, this sort of, now they're starting to put these pieces together and use it in like, well, this would not be good, right? And we're approaching, of course, the time when this quote we're approaching 1908, and you realize, oh, this is really coming together for something absolutely devilish. Like, they really own the communication system, and now they have the skill and the art of manipulating public opinion. And so when I went back and I started reading, it's like they're talking about social control and public opinion. Like, you're following the word propaganda. It like abrupts endly, or it ends abruptly at World War I. Like I didn't have another cup of coffee. I think I need that. And so prior to that, it goes to public opinion, publicity, press agentry. Those are the words you have to follow. If you can, and then you'll dig up some really interesting literature on it. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think also what helps like the hundreds of years of psychology and theology, this and stuff, the studies that we have to prove all this stuff is just amazing.
mhm.
That and that's one of the things where it's so perplexing, like why it's still happening. I am a big advocate for, if the government just came out and told us what they're actually doing, we'd probably support them. I understand geopolitics on a whole different level. Like you were saying just a little while ago, you take these little dots and you're connecting them from all over the place, but most people aren't really like that. Most people are very narrow in their
Right.
field of vision. And when you zoom out and you take things, you take geopolitics on a global scale, you can really see the players in the game. And it is really
Mhm.
like a giant game of Risk.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
propaganda is a tool.
Right.
And it really, that's why I'm not anti-propaganda, I guess. Like I'm anti the wrong type of propaganda, if that makes sense. I do understand the need for nuance. I do understand the need of like fog of war type stuff, like
Mhm.
operational security and things like that. I just I don't know why the American government they're so allergic to the truth. I think it's the grand manipulation. I struggle to find, like, where are we going with this? What is their end goal for getting me to believe this one thing? And how do I dissect from there? It's like reverse engineering almost.
Yeah.
Like,
So that's
how am I supposed to feel based on what they want me to feel?
mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And again, if you don't know longitudinally, like what I've just shared, you realize, okay, now that brings a different piece. If somebody believes what I say, or look at the sources, yourself, but that brings it a longitudinal focus. And what I found was that here's the interesting thing: the people that really own the money and have the money and had the skill set, that had been creating the skill set, were the holders of wealth, as Wallace brags. And so they're kind of behind the scenes. And so I did like this case study where I looked at, okay, so you have what's called the Age of Reform. And there were two guys, one of them, Kalko, he wrote The Triumph of Conservatism, and another guy, Skylar. And he basically said during that time period that they called the Age of Reform, they got labeled historically the Age of Reform, which was a victory for the people, was the age of the ascendancy of corporate capitalism. Okay, so it moved from the agrarian mercantile system of more free market. Okay, they were monopolizing things, of course, from the Civil War on to 1900s, and then of course the corporate structure got personhood in the late 1800s. And so you had this big uproar from the people, like we keep losing. Even the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Committee, didn't do what it promised to do. It was toothless, and the Sherman Act really didn't do anything to stop the consolidations and the trusts. And so anyways, but they did great work, and they had like original sources. I can't get to those kinds of original sources based on, I'm not an academic. And so anyways, I followed that work, and they basically said, corporations won. They got the legislation, and they really showed it really well. They demonstrated it. And so what was going on? So then that was one chapter, and then I took a look at the presidency, and they had moved publicity right into the White House during McKinley's era. And
Yeah.
before that time, the reporters went to Congress. Like the presidency was sort of like a backwater. He only showed up for ceremonial events, and he really didn't do anything,
Yeah. He's
that
kind of a
much.
mouthpiece, and it was
Right.
intended to be that way.
Right. Well, so they start doing something. Are you familiar with this idea called a clipping bureau?
No, no.
Okay. Okay. So a clipping bureau, Lincoln Steffens, who was one of the muckrakers, wrote home to his dad in like 1890. He had gone to school in 5 different universities across Europe. And he said to his dad, I'm thinking maybe I'm going to go into this clipping bureau thing, you know? And what it was early reputation management. So they would take, like, if you wanted to follow what
So
people thought
PR.
about you, right, what the king or whatever, you would bring in all the newspapers of Europe, and then you would hire these people, and they would just go, you know, page by page, and actually clip out the articles about you, then categorize it and summarize it. So like, here were the bad things, or whatever, you know, whatever it related to, whether it was a public policy issue or a reputational issue. And then of course they would sell their services, and the dad's like, no, I don't think so, but you know. But anyways, they were bringing that into the McKinley presidency. He had a clipping bureau that was, you know, like updating him, like, well, how do people feel about the Spanish American War,
Yeah.
right? How do people feel like getting around? And he would do a what they called swing the circle. Right now the railroads could just come around real easy, you know, hit all the states, or a lot of them. And he would do a speaking tour, and then they would compile, you know, it's like a feedback mechanism, feedback loop. Okay, what's going on now? Really early social media, if you can think of now, as like just mega uh, feedback loops, and all kinds of
Well,
intricacy.
I'm actually sitting in the city where the Pony Express started. So
Okay,
I'm very, very familiar with all of that stuff.
right,
I'm
right.
St. Joseph, Missouri is where I'm at.
Okay,
And so we've got a long history here of and now I say long history. Now we're talking on a global scale. 250 years isn't that
yeah,
long,
right,
but I'm very familiar with with those things and how those things come about. And so the Pony Express was the only way we could get mail back and forth during
right.
that time, and it makes things easier to have it go through the right hands before it's getting to the person it needs to get to.
Yeah, right, right, right. So that was but that was a big deal, because it's the start of scientific management, or the scientific engineering of the public mind. Okay, that was the first rudimentary feedback loop. They used it as well in 1893 to sell the World's Fair in Chicago. Okay, so they had all the papers of the world. They used just a huge amount of money, because nobody really wanted the fair in Chicago. It was sort of viewed as a backwater. You know, it certainly wasn't New York or Paris or any of those other places. And then you had to sell them on not only people coming from Europe to cross the ocean, then they had to go literally halfway inland across, you know, the continent. And yeah, that's a pretty big sell, right? Like, oh God, you know, do I really want to do all that to go to Chicago, right?
Right,
So they
right.
were like constantly, you know, doing reputational damage, or you know what I mean, promoting it in a different way and selling it. And it had grown a lot, but they had to do a lot of rehab there. So you know, you see these pieces of the puzzle being put together, and like, to lead into what you were saying, that people, you know, kind of don't have a way to look at everything. And there's a framework, and you maybe not, I don't know if you can see this, if it'll
Yeah, it's kind of blurring it out, but
kind of blurry.
if
Okay,
when we're done here, if you want to, I can shoot
send
you
it.
my email when we're done,
Okay,
and we can send all that stuff through email,
yeah,
and
you
we
can
can
put
actually
this
put
up.
it up on the screen.
Okay,
Yeah.
for sure. So this just says frameworks, lenses to understand the world. And there's historical, economic, communication, relational, and selling. Again, what I realized at the end of my book was that I was hitting each one of these, which makes it really complicated. Like, if you understand historically what's been done, you know, how the people were losing, what the issues were at the time, blah, 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 blah. Then, and you can see patterns and principles being repeated over and over again. You go, wow, nothing's changing here, right? So, but you have to have that perspective, right? And you have to have analyzed the truth lag, right? Not just taken the mythology or the narrative that was scripted for
Right.
us. Like you said, the winners write the history. You have to look at the people that a decade or 2 decades later, and then see that over a period of time. So that's one
Right.
thing I tried to do in the book. Then economically, you have to realize that at the turn of the century, there were a lot of people like Thorstein Veblen, Adams, he said, we have a structure now that we don't have a name for. It's governance by moneyed corporations. And he was an ancestor of John Adams. And
Wow.
so, people are already saying that, there's so much money behind the system that we won't have a democracy here because there's just too much power. That the money should not have been aggregated like that. And a little bit of the history of the joint stock company, right? Um,
No, no. So let me give you a little bit of background on
okay.
me. I'm not formally educated. The furthest I got in my formal education was the eighth grade, and I took the GED test. So I'm pretty much I'm an autodidact, and I
Yeah.
really only learn about things that I'm interested in. So I know a little about a lot, but not a lot about anything. So
Yeah. No, but that's perfect. You're probably more educated and sometimes than getting the prefabbed
I,
ideas
I'm
jammed into
actually
your head.
finding I'm actually finding that like the more educated a person is, the less they make sense to me because they have these
Hmm.
preconceived notions
Yeah.
of how the world really works, and I can see through all that bullshit. It doesn't.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So the joint stock company was originally created to be able to do things that one person would not want to undertake. So for example, it's an expensive proposition and maybe the risk is high. And so somebody does not want to put all their money in an individual, right? So that you compile investors and you can share rewards, but also you share risk. So for example,
Right.
the
'Cause
Hudson Bay Company.
otherwise we get something like Kamala Harris in 2024. Well, she had 1.8 billion dollars
Yes.
that she spent on her campaign and she did not win.
Right. Right. That's a big loss, right? But I don't think it was just coming from one person. You had multiple people, right?
Right. Yes.
Like yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So anyway, so this is in the 1700s, and then there's this, and that worked fairly well. And it was always chartered. These things were chartered by the state or some dominant sovereign, and they were for a limited time and for a public good, and then they were ended. Okay. So then the South Sea bubble happened in somewhere in the 1700s in Great Britain, and everybody got screwed. Everybody got taken to the cleaners in this this adventure, whatever it was, right? And so they said, that's it. The people just were, everybody was mad, and they go, what? No more of these. That's it. They're too dangerous. You're aggregating all this capital, and we're giving them powers that they shouldn't have. And so Thomas Hobbes wrote in Leviathan, he said that, and he said, well, if you could charter these corporations eternally, if they didn't have an end date, they would be like parasites in the entrails of a sovereign. Okay, you
Yeah.
couldn't have multiple sovereigns competing because they're too powerful. They're going to take over the state,
Yeah.
which was the body, right? And so the South Sea bubble banned joint stock companies for about 100 years. Then in the mid 1800s, a generation forgets, right? The generation pass away, and they bring these things up again. And so then they were chartered also in the United States, but again, closely held reins by the states themselves, right?
Right.
Here's this public good, and if we decide that it's not a public good, boom, we're pulling it. You have a privilege at the behest of the state, and that's it. And we can pull it, and normally they have end dates. So but that's when things started to get, then we had the 14th Amendment, then you had personhood rights, and all of a sudden these things were being created in perpetuity and had the rights that you and I have instead of being subject to the state. And so the chains were taken off these things. And again, when you read people from that time period, they realized the dramatic change that this actually was in the state of now power balance, right? Because if you were a little guy, you could, like, okay, you read Henry Demarest Lloyd, Wealth Against Commonwealth, and how Standard Oil got its money just colluding with the railroads to get special rates to destroy all the
Right.
competition. I mean, all of that was really, it worked to the benefit of monopolies, these large
Yes.
monopolies. And so that was the crux that that I was uncovering for the first time for me, because my education did not cover that, and then realizing that the people,
Nobody's dead.
yeah, I know. So so the people were really disaffected, and they were asking for help. It's like, is the government powerful enough to put this giant back in the box, this Leviathan. And so this the age of reform. Here you have the president who comes along, Teddy Roosevelt, the trust buster, we learn from schooling, and he's going to have carrying a big stick, and he's going to beat back the forces of evil, showing, demonstrating that the government indeed does have the power to beat these guys back. But what you realize is that um, they did not. They got exactly what they wanted. That Roosevelt was dealing behind the scenes with them. He was really their friends, and so the age of reform was not the age of reform really, but it was promoted. So there was like this illusion that in this crucible, like I realized that that time period is so much like today, because lots of people are disaffected today.
That's kind of why I'm smiling, is because I see so many similarities between what you're saying and what's actually happening right now.
Right, but there was this massive sleight of hand. It's like, the magician comes on stage and goes, "See this? Government really works for you. Here's Teddy Roosevelt. Here's he shaking a stick at J.P. Morgan, taking him to task." And then even the Muckrakers articles, I isolated, and you have to read the book because it would to get the full thing. But the Muckrakers articles, McClure was a literary magazine essentially, and he comes back from Europe, and there's 3 years from January '03 to the muckraking speech when Teddy Roosevelt literally blows him up. Right? Are you familiar with that? He goes into
No,
the Gridiron Club. Yeah, he goes into the Gridiron Club, and you know basically says there's a muck raking muck was an allusion to just bringing up the bad things of society. And
right.
so he compares them to those that are raking muck all the time, and that you have to do something better than that and focus on the positive things. And he basically throws everybody under the bus, even people who were doing good things. And so that 3 year period is essentially ended by him. And but all the exposures led directly to the legislation that they wanted. And so it looks, in retrospect, somewhat synchronized. And again, the reader of my book will have to judge that based on that extended case study where I look at what business wanted and they got, then Teddy Roosevelt, and then the muckraking era itself. And I make the case that most of it was really an elaborate smoke and mirrors
Yeah.
on the people that said, yes, democracy still works. Don't go to socialism. Don't bring the pitchforks into Washington yet. We're still a self-governing republic. And so anyways, that's kind of like, it was a really big aha for me.
Yeah. So I have a similar kind of awakening, I guess. And I've talked about this on the podcast many, many times. I saw around 2014-ish is kind of when I started understanding and waking up to what was going on in media and the purpose of media, and kind of I I, I don't want to
What was
say
the year again?
like around 2014,
Okay.
2012, 2013,
Okay.
2014. So in 2014 there was a Black Lives Matter protest near where I live, Ferguson, Missouri. There was an incident there where a young man was shot by police, and it was a big issue, and there were riots all over the place. But I didn't feel like I was being told the truth, and it turns out that I wasn't. And there was more nuance to the issue, and there was money being thrown behind these protests, and it's like right now in current times, like there's no protests that are happening right now that I would believe is organic. I don't believe organic protests even exist anymore. And when I started understanding these things, it's like right now I'm currently going through these things in my head where I have to try to decide whether what I'm seeing with my own eyes is even the truth. And it sucks. It's really difficult. Our
Mhm.
current administration, like I voted for our current administration because I saw them as not a means to an end, but I saw Donald Trump as like a great disruptor. I saw all the the establishment coming after him, and that's essentially why I voted for him. I like his personality. I think he's an asshole, but he's a funny asshole, and he's my asshole, and that's kind of how I feel about Donald Trump. And I feel like I've over the last um almost 10 years, I've the media, the establishment, the government, everyone has tried to convince me that this guy is a horrible bad guy. I just don't see it.
Hmm.
I just don't see it. I see some tinges of authoritarianism. I
Hmm.
see crony capitalism. I see a lot of things, but I don't see the evil that these people are trying to tell me that is there. I just don't see it.
Right. So so in looking at Teddy Roosevelt, I see an early Trump. Okay. Um, or Trump is a latter day Teddy Roosevelt. So you're looking at how they manage a democracy, and so uh, they have to usurp the discontent, and that's
I'm sorry.
exactly, you have to usurp the discontent. And so like I said, there was a massive amounts of, you know, unrest and anguish and anger in the country. And so if you can put your guy, so Bob LaFollette was a real reformer out of Wisconsin, and he had built his own party from the ground up essentially to combat both sides. And he was really the rightful heir to the reform leadership position. And Roosevelt bumped him out. And what happens is you lead that discontent to a safe harbor. Okay. So like Teddy Roosevelt's constant refrain was, the trusts aren't bad in and of themselves. It's just whether they do good or bad things, and then we'll police them. Right.
Right.
But in fact, their largeness, their size, their aggregate was a danger, right? Like, because the little guy could then never compete, right? He was always
Right.
like, so for example, when they offered stock, the people would take their savings and capitalize this business. Then the original owners could take a lot of their money out right now, and then you could buy up more things. And so you're almost like, it's like almost like a scorched earth policy for like small to medium sized businesses will never then be able to then navigate against that power source. But anyways,
Yeah, yeah.
Teddy
It's a
Roosevelt, Teddy
fractional
Roosevelt,
reserve banking in a nutshell
yeah,
is basically it's making something out of nothing, if you will.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly. So that's too much aggregate power, right? And so normal people can't stand up against that. And so you see Teddy Roosevelt serving a really useful function to take the discontent and lead it somewhere else. Like, I think most people who voted for Trump did not expect to be doing what he's doing. Like let's talking
I
about taking over
expected it because he
Greenland,
said,
taking
I
over,
mean,
like he didn't run on that platform.
right,
And all
right.
all of a sudden, right, you have like, well, we're gonna deal with Cuba, we're blockading them, the Venezuela thing, and then you have talking about annexing Canada, whether he's joking or not, as a 51st state, and take it. You look like he's assembling the North American Union. You know what I
Yes.
mean? That a lot of people
Yes.
talk about in technocracy. Okay, so people who voted for him, he didn't run on that at all.
Right.
So he's taken a discontent, and people, like, here's the thing, right? The action reaction, right? So they go so far left in an administration, right? And the violations are so just they're just, people are just like, I don't care what he does. We're going over here, and he can have the whole thing to run the table on what, you know, to get, so we can win,
Right.
on this side. And so I understand that perspective. But I think, for the most part, we're being played. And if you look historically, again, I go back, and I go back to that era early on where they usurped the discontent. They passed the income tax law and the Federal Reserve right at the end of the muckraking era, like, 1913. And they had to have that to get into the war. And then the people were taken through the war. And as Ivy Lee, was the public relations expert for Rockefeller, says that, by the time the war ended, the trusts were just accepted at that point. There
Yes,
was no
yes,
fighting back. You know what I mean? And then you were plunged into the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and another war, but it was all over by then. I mean, so the battle really was really critical at that early turn of the century, that they had to beat back the forces that wanted to rein in the trusts.
right, right. And so how I see things currently right now is, um, and it's difficult to say these things and not look like an asshole, but um, what I see currently, like tariffs and the negotiations, this is essentially the the tariffs and all of that, the restructuring of all these deals, and this it's funding World War III. I believe, um, so I believe that this we're currently in World War III right now.
Mhm.
The reason why nobody's talking about it is because if we talk about it, there goes our way to pay for it. And I believe a lot
Well,
of this.
how do you mean that? Like, if we talk about it, I mean, because he's still going to try to do the tariffs. It sounds like just a different way.
Well, if people understood that we are in World War III, they're going to be panicked. They're not going to be
Okay.
spending money. They're not going to be propping up
Okay.
the AI.
Okay. I see. I
Like
see what you're saying. Okay.
so, the AI bubble that's currently right now, I don't think anybody really has any faith in AI except for the big tech guys that are pushing it. But it is like it is driving capital to the markets. It's driving
Mm-hmm.
capital to the
Mm-hmm.
banks. It's driving cap, and that in is essentially what's paying for this global war, that nobody seems to admit that's happening right now. The issues with like Greenland. So Greenland's actually we've been trying to get a hold of Greenland for 100 years now, and I think that there was some strategy with whatever Donald Trump was doing. I think that you're on to something with the North American Union. I think ultimately that may be somewhere where we go. But if you look at the reactions of Europe, if you look at the reactions of Canada, they really don't. There are none of their arguments have any teeth. The UK isn't. They're not even useful anymore. And so like, did you watch the Davos thing where so the World
Which
Economic
one? There's a
Forum,
lot of clips on that.
the latest one, I
Oh,
watched the whole thing.
okay.
All the things that I could watch. The governor of California was at Davos for some stupid reason.
Mm-hmm.
He's at Davos, and he's trying to virtue signal to the people that are there. Of course, Donald Trump's there and he's advocating for his whole thing. And then you got the French President Macron coming out and wagging his finger in our faces. And I think, and this is what I essentially believe, like propaganda was like, you got good and you got bad. You got them and you got us. Like that's essentially the long and short of it. And that's why I said what I said in the beginning was I'm actually a pretty big fan of some American propaganda as I understand it. Like one of my favorite propaganda films is actually is Independence Day. It's an alien movie. It's a Hollywood blockbuster type movie. It showcases a lot of cool shit. And that's what I really like about it. But I'm also a big fan of the UFO topic. I believe most of that, like 90% of the UFO stuff, that's all propaganda, and it's designed to do to fill a purpose. And but I think
But the thing here's the thing though. What you're saying is you agree to propaganda for the world, but here's the thing. What happens is if like, and literally it is a stage. Like if you think of it about all the communication networks right now, we know that like they're really consolidated into six major companies, you
right,
know, almost globally, right? And so that stage, that platform that has that maximal reach, right, is limited to who they want to put on it. And so
right.
this idea of free speech, like that you and I can get on a, you know, a platform and you know, maybe get, you know, like what percentage of the reach, right? I mean, and not minimizing anything
Yeah,
you're doing,
yeah,
you know, and
yeah.
not to say
No,
it like
no.
that.
I just actually talked about it this morning with my
Okay.
wife. It's a pay to play system. This podcasting
Right.
thing is a pay to play system because um it was so easy to do. And
Mm.
so they were like, there's all these podcasters starting up, and Joe Rogan's now the biggest podcaster in the
Mhm.
world. And so there's now roadblocks to success here that there wasn't before.
Right. So
And
like so I'm that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you have free speech, but
right,
the reach is, you don't like, you don't have anything if you don't have reach,
right,
because you can't get
right,
your ideas out. And so they dominate the playing field in every sphere, whether they've given us the internet or not. You know what I mean? Like, that's
right.
not, it doesn't matter. We can't play because they have money to market. Like, if I want
Absolutely.
to boost you, you can buy all the likes and all the comments you want. You
Yes.
know that, right? And
Yes,
so we
I've
can
so
elevate,
just
and then
told
we'll
I could
just,
spend a couple $1,000 and make I could spend $2,000 and make four, but I don't
yeah,
have the $2,000 to spend.
yeah, yeah. So this idea that, it's we have guaranteed rights in this Constitution about free speech. Once they got this monopoly platform, you can't, truth, any dissenting voices can't get through the orthodoxy. And so that's what people go, well, but we have right and left. Yeah, that's fine, so long as they keep you siloed into this thinking that never
Right
gets
and
to the
left is
real
two
issues,
sides of
right?
the
Because
same coin.
yes, and we can't get to the real issues. I mean, I don't think I have it, but oh yeah, I do. I have this thing called, and I'll send it this to you, but the monopoly tree.
Yes, yes,
Okay. And so the idea is, there's things growing off on these leaves, like maybe wars or digital IDs, or things like 15-minute cities, right? Things that we might be concerned about, right? Look at the whole Gaza thing, the Riviera in the Middle East, right? That's really
yes,
concerning. It's like a corporate city state, right?
yes.
Um, very concerning. Well, but if you try to pull those off the tree, right? You still have all these monopolies, right? Like, literally, these are the base of the Jenga blocks, right?
Right.
You have a monopoly of the news media, a monopoly of finance. You have you know what I mean? You have universities being monopolized. You have medicine being monopolized at this point. Like, I've been in healthcare for 30 years. I remember early 2000, I said, oh my God, they're coming into healthcare and the corporations are buying up healthcare.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I was working in the, like in an area where they had these small little community hospitals, right? And they were going up and they would buy one and then they would buy the other one. By the time they got all of them, they basically said, okay, your pay per visit is going to get decreased $5 a visit, which doesn't sound like that much, but if you add in the whole year, it was like, um waxing my income for about 10,000,
Yeah.
just because they could. And
Right.
so, I mean, I realized then, oh boy, and like, as my friend says, who's a nurse, she says, Florence Nightingale has left the building. Which is just, you know what I mean? It's about profits. It has nothing to do with caring about human beings who are in a vulnerable state
Right,
anymore.
but none of that stuff is real in my mind. None of like so we discussed fractional reserve banking. Like, because I understand that, I understand that money isn't real. I understand that if you don't hold it, it's not yours. And that the inflation of the dollar, and the world's reserve currency and all that good stuff. I understand that on a different, on a fundamental level, as in I only need me to survive. I only need food, shelter, water,
Mm-hmm.
and the love of my family.
Right.
That's really all I need. But there's a whole population, 8 billion people in this world that believe that we have to have all this shit to live, and we have to like the grocery store stuff. Like, I don't know why all Americans for some reason think going to the grocery store is now a right. Why? These grocery stores were put up as a matter of convenience. When you allow your government to decide where your food goes, like, I mean, they could decide not to feed you as well. And that's where I'm so I
But I think, like,
the
going back to what you said about it, like the money thing. Yes, it's, they can print money. Like, I would love that job. Can I do that too? Like, can I
yes,
just print money for nothing and make interest on it? Um, yeah, just talking about modern alchemy, right?
right,
But anyways, but you're talking about it's not real. But here's the thing, right? The system is based on all this disreality, if you will, right? And so, like, if, for example, like I just wrote a post about Jenga blocks of it. I mean, we pull the Jenga block of that, you're risking really catastrophic fail. Like what do you do to all the people who are on pensions, money coming from the government, right? Like if the stocks were to just, if everybody just took their money out of the system, like for example, right, they took their money out of all the banks and what you'd see this massive sort of, things would really go bad for a while. People aren't willing to suffer that, you know what I mean?
Right.
And we're not ready to, right? Like you said, well, if I have the love of my people close to me and I have some food and shelter, but a lot of people don't. They don't have a means of income. Maybe they're older. They don't have a way to make, grow their own food. And so we've got this large dependent population that would be just devastated when something like, and even the active working population, because they're working, they don't have the means to get things ready. And so, I
So
mean, we're
shouldn't
really hard up
shouldn't
against it.
we as a population try to educate these folks that they don't have to depend on their government? They don't have to depend on the
Yeah.
grocery stores. They don't have to depend on money. I understand how silly that sounds. Money's made up and property and blah blah blah, but it really is. Like if you could go back a couple thousand years and understand that like houses weren't a thing, property wasn't a thing. Like the, people had people had property, but it wasn't like it wasn't like today where you could like this cup is $30 and
Yeah.
because I bought it's so convoluted and it goes to consumerism. It goes to like it's basically a giant scam. It
Yeah.
really is a giant scam. But shouldn't we be educating folks about this scam instead of perpetuating it?
Yeah, no, I agree. And so like that's one of the things, like you'd be amazed. There's a book called by Alex Carey called Taking the Risk Out of Democracy. And he goes through a lot of the campaigns that were like, I say that the American people are the most propagandized country in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
Literally.
Yes, we are.
Literally. Okay.
Yes,
So
we are.
Madison Avenue, first of all, there was the Americanization campaign, which is, they wanted cheap workers from Eastern Europe. So they lured them all over here, but they didn't want their socialism and anarchists and radical views. And so the holders of wealth created this Americanization where they would get, they'd get their citizenship, and then, they'd get all that rah, rah, rah thing, right? And they would, take that out of them, and then they handed it off to the government. So the government would pay for that, right? But which is what they always do. But then there were all these campaigns like right coming into, let me see, so National Association of Manufacturers, which was really just a front group for the industrialists and the bankers, spent literally, I know they spent 1 billion a year for the 4 years going into Reagan on capitalism, making it just like capitalism and Americanism just completely wedded together, that idea. And they spent 1 million a year for 4 years, I think coming right out of World War II, to do the same thing. And
I still
so
a
that,
lot of money in World War II.
oh my God. And so, right. So you can see in my book, I'm trying to show where they are using money all across society for these massive campaigns, not only 6 million for that war and then World War II, and then they did their own campaigns to rehabilitate the robber barons so that they would be seen as captains of industry and philanthropists. And then they rehabilitated a three-pronged strategy: the men, the entities themselves. They went from monsters to benevolent giants. Okay. And there was Madison Avenue. I have it's like Creating the Corporate Soul. There's a book this big, and they talk about, and they show all the pictures. It's really interesting, but millions of dollars there, and then millions of dollars and billions to sell the corporate system itself as free market enterprise. And of course, at that point, it's not free market enterprise, because you
Yeah, that's
can't
all
compete.
bullshit. Yeah.
Right. You can't compete with these monopolistic monsters. And now they're transnational. And so, like, if you have an economic understanding of the joint stock company way back there, and where we are here with transnational companies, which don't give a toot about the countries they come from, they really aren't wedded to a country, right? And they have all kinds of power that that their ability to kind of range the system and look for things, which is, like poor employee or poor labor protections, poor environmental protections, subsidies, and tax breaks. And so
Yeah.
they can literally go over the world, hunt the world for like the exploitation of that, and then set their tent down there, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't have to stay, so when Trump says, I think it's just, it's like, we're going to make America great again, and we're going to bring all this manufacturing back. they don't have to do that. Why do they have to do that? They think you're going to be gone in 4 years. I mean, like, that's
Right.
not going to happen. It's just not. So if you have, so they're going
I
back to
actually
these.
think I actually think some of it's actually working. And the reason why I think some of it is working is because it's made it like it's actually cheaper to have a lot of stuff made here than it is to have it made elsewhere and shipped here. I think some of it is actually working as intended, or as we've been told it's been intended. But the thing about like these large corporations in 2008, we had like a national buyout of these large corporations. I didn't get any of that money. I was I
What?
was suffering. I was suffering so bad. I had bought this truck. I was so proud of this truck. I loved this truck. It was big red Chevy. I was in my early 20s. You know, it was a Midwestern boy man
Yeah.
thing. You know,
Right.
I was so happy about this truck. 8 miles to the gallon in this truck. And then gas went up to $4 a gallon. And then I couldn't afford that truck anymore.
You were
And I was
barely
so,
going up to the food store and back.
yeah, it cost me $10 a day to drive 5 miles.
Wow.
And it was so heartbreaking to me that I had to give up this truck. And then, you know, here come the government, and they're like, okay, we understand that if you fail that all this stuff's going to happen, and you know, blah blah blah. But we were convinced that these if these companies fail, that the whole country failed.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of letting them take their licks, and it was all actually by design. It was
Mm-hmm.
actually by design that they did that to us. The sub mortgage prime loans,
Mm-hmm.
and all that bullshit.
Right.
And it was heartbreaking to me to see the people that advocate for big government and regulations and all this stuff, to 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 have to go through all that. It was heartbreaking for me to see that. And I understand it on a fundamental level now, but like, what do we do about it? Like, I don't know what to do short of not buying things, not buying a new car because
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in the vehicles. Like, we were sold, all of us were sold that we had to have vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have vehicles. And not only do we have to have vehicles, but we have to have the newest one.
Mm-hmm.
We have to have the best one.
Right.
And I've opted out of all of that. I'm out. I've opted out of consumerism and all that
Mm-hmm.
good stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all this cool stuff you see behind me, like, I don't buy any of this stuff. It's all old. I
Mm-hmm.
don't buy any of that stuff anymore because I just don't believe in it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's propping up this entire world is the belief in all this bullshit.
Yeah.
And
Let
if,
me ask you, do you have kids?
yes, yes,
What
I've got,
and ages? Are they getting up to where they're
so I've got 20, I've got a 23-year-old, a
okay?
22-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And I've also
Okay.
got 3 grandkids.
Okay. So those older ones, how are they, because I think the younger people kind of are getting the fact that
They are,
there's not that
yes.
many opportunities, and discontent is where you want to go with the message, right? Because like to the older people who had this pensions and had this like literally idyllic life in a sense, making more money, having the best healthcare than probably almost any generation in the history of the world, right? And I would tell people, medically, I go, this is unsustainable, right? Like you get these people up in the older years and you're spending, half a million on their
Yeah,
care. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you didn't make that to like put into the system. Like this is not something that is going to continue, right?
right.
It's being given to you. People, so anyways, but going back to the younger kids, they're starting to wake up to the fact that whether they have a corporate job or or a labor job, right? And they're staring down AI, and I do think that AI is going to be more disruptive than the computer. I mean, there's some, because I've worked with it a little bit, and it's like spitting out amazing. Like I can put my book, my new book, into Notebook LM, and it'll spit out these gorgeous slides in a way that's like oh my,
Yeah.
I mean, and as a solo entrepreneur, like for me to pay, it's like, most of these things that I have made are, $80 to $100 by a graphic artist, and you
Right.
know, right? You pay for everything. And so like you just look at there's going to be many things that's going to disrupt. So they're looking at even, I think, a more even a more shortage of jobs than there are even now as this thing starts to kind of roll through stuff, So,
I
but
don't know.
anyways,
I don't know how though. I don't know how that sustains itself. Like, where is the money going to come from to support these corporations if
right.
nobody has any?
I
That's
agree. I mean,
I don't
it's like,
think AI is going to be the disruptor that everybody thinks it's going to be, because
mm,
I don't think AI is that smart. I really don't. It's learning machines. I think it has, obviously I'm not the smartest person in the world, and other people are infinitely smarter than me. I understand that, but I don't see AI as the problem that everybody else sees it as. I
mm,
see it as like, AI has made you more productive. If you could enter all the, it's a tool to augment, to supplement you. Is
well,
is is
let me give you an example. So like my first book, I paid for somebody to do a audiobook.
right.
Okay. So his entire business model is gone.
Hmm.
Entire. I mean, you can literally clone your own voice and do your own book with 11 labs. Okay. And so like his thing's gone. All
But that
right.
was,
And
what I'm saying though, is that's kind of like a, that type of job didn't really produce anything anyway. It's nothing tangible. That it's not, like, kind of like money, the fake money. If you're not holding it, it's not real. Like gold.
right,
It
but it's still a service job where you employ yourself is something, right?
right,
So if you're a
right,
graphic artist and literally like, somebody can just say what they want and get a video, a picture, then you're, I mean, that just went, that
how
whole
many
industry.
graphic how many graphic artists were there 200 years ago?
Probably next to none.
Yeah, it's so what I'm saying though, like, it's a made up job. It's busybody work. It's something that somebody got paid to do, right? I mean, that's it's income, but it's made up.
But what
um
I'm saying is there's really not that many jobs that you can do outside on your own. Like for example, like you're a podcaster, maybe you're trying to make some money from it, right? Okay. And so you say we're competing against these behemoths that can throw all kinds of money at just elevating whoever they want to. Plus they can put them on their platform, they can go on Oprah, or you know what I mean, something else
right,
to
but the
boost.
general selling point of that is the advertising behind it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The so how Oprah makes money is, like, Oprah's not making money with her conversation, she's making money with the
With
advertisements
the
that's going
eyeballs.
on in the
But what
background.
I'm saying is you have to pay, I mean, you can't afford, like if I'm a, like the holders of wealth, I just like to use that term, right? Because it's like, okay, if I want to boost anybody into the system, literally, you know what I mean? I can make or
Right,
break any platform.
right,
And so we can't play against that. So what all I'm saying, to your point, is that there are service jobs and there are things that we're trying to make a living in,
right.
whether they existed years or whether they're going to exist in the future. But the pile of jobs that we can do that with, like I even look at my job, right? Like if they wanted to, and again you might disagree because of the AI thing, but you could literally, like in teaching, right? You can have like the best AV stuff and supplement the teacher is just the person who goes out and checks the homework and pats the kid on the back. You know what I mean? Because
Right.
you can have literally the best teacher in front of the class every day. Why would you have like a million math teachers who aren't that great at it? You know what I mean? You could just put the best one up there. And so you keep centralizing things over and over again to the fact that there is nothing, you know what I mean, or very little things that the average human being can do outside the system, besides just hunt and make their own food to make some money. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'm saying is, I think that's the why we have propaganda, is so that we believe that we need jobs, right? We don't really need jobs. Like, if you go back 2,000 years ago, what the hell were poor people doing back then? Like, if you take the power dynamics, what they are today, there's the haves and there's the have-nots. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the have-nots are the people who keep things running for the haves. If we go backwards in time, people, the service jobs and all that stuff, none of that stuff existed. It's all made up. The service industry as a whole is kind of made up.
Okay,
And
okay. So, but my question to you is, you're talking about a society where people could live on a plot of land and grow their own food, correct?
yes,
Okay, so now that land is skyrocketing, the equity firms are already down here in my area in Arizona trying to buy up property left and right and driving up the cost of that, right? And so you have this, again, that if the land gets monopolized because the people can't afford it, they don't have a job, like you say, well, why do we need money? But we don't have land anymore, and we can't grow our own food,
right.
and so that is a critical issue. And so, like, I'm all for resilience. I mean, I exactly know what you're saying, and I drive a car that's from 2006. I love it. It's my Honda Element, and I so it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, and I'm fine with that. But and so I totally agree with your sentiment that a lot of what we think we need is actually just the Madison Avenue advertising us telling us
Yes,
we have to
exactly.
live
It's
like this.
propaganda.
Yeah,
Yes,
we
that's
have to live
exactly where
like
I was
this.
going
And
with that.
yeah, and so I agree with you. I totally agree with you. But then again, we're getting boxed into this corner where, like, your kids, it may be like the least bit of
But
property. Like, you're looking at
no,
houses now
actually,
that
what I'm saying is we're boxing ourselves in.
Mhm.
This is the propaganda working. Saying that we don't have enough land, that's the propaganda. We do have plenty of land. So
But I
what
mean,
what
concept
would make
like I'm not saying, I'm saying plenty of land
that we don't
theoretically.
own? We don't own any, like, we don't own, like, what is owning land?
Well, I you can, so I agree, right? So like you're I had this conversation with an Indian guy down here, interestingly, and it's like they didn't have that concept. They're
Yeah,
like, how can
neither
you
neither
own
does
Mother
China.
Earth? You know what I mean?
Neither does China. China doesn't have that understanding either, because their government, like, when you buy a house, it's not, you don't buy a house, you buy a 99-year lease.
Mm,
and
interesting.
and so, like, what I'm like, it's all propaganda. The service industries and all that, that's all bullshit is what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to, like, poo poo on your ideas or anything. What I'm saying is, like, as a whole, the reason why we believe these things is the propaganda, is the money machine. That's how these people get and keep power, is they make us believe that these things that they have is power, and it's not. It's absolutely not.
Well, I mean, I think there is power in society. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
there is definitely an aggregate of power in society, and so it is not just an illusion. I would say, right?
No, right. I,
again,
I
and
agree. I agree.
if you start to push back, the 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 snapping in all the puzzle pieces, are going to collapse on itself. Like I said, if we just took our money out of that, saying, hey, or pulled it back and put it into actual tangible things, like, let's say, like you're talking about, um the system implodes for quite a while, right? Like,
Yes.
until you rebuild something back. And that is the crux of the issue. I mean, they're going to implode a system, I think, and bring in what is more like a world governments, whether it has a central, like, overtly centralized, or like it's like the top holding company and General Mills, right?
You're
So we
you're
have all
seeing the
these.
puzzle pieces on the global stage of World War III today. That's what we're seeing. Is
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think they're attempting to shove us into this one world government system.
right. But whether that'll be like overtly one world, or if it'll still look like we have facades of nation states, just like I guess General Mills, and then how many brands do they have? So long as
Yes.
these are just
Yes.
brands, you know what I mean? But the central control comes from, I get, whatever the holding company is at the very top. Okay. We could still have the illusion of choice,
Yes.
which you do in that ecosystem. You think you're buying, some packaging, relabeled this, but it's the same, it's funny because I walked into it and didn't want to work for this company, but something made me go. So it was a physical therapy interview, and I go, so they share this conference room with a home health company, right? So I said, oh, really? And then later on in the interview, you go, well, we share staff. And I said, so you're the same company? Right
Right.
in the interview, you know what I mean? I knew I wasn't going to get it, right? And she goes, oh, yeah, we are. And so they had two brands, right? But same holding company at top. Then she
Yeah,
goes on to tell me,
I actually do the same thing. So I love that example. So I really love that example. So the name of the show is Coffee with Bearded Bad Dad,
Mhm.
but that's the name of my production company. So I actually do the same thing. I do business under it's a convoluted thing. And it's one of those things that one of the lies that we were told to keep us going. It's risk management and all
Right.
this. It's all tied into this wonderful little cheating scandal thing. And I do the same thing. So I know exactly what you're
But
talking
again,
about.
so if you take that on a world stage, you know what I mean,
Yes.
and that most of these governments are controlled by the wealth behind them, which is what I would say is going on. And
Yes.
the banks, the IMF, the BIS, right? I mean, they just like they're literally saying in Gaza, we're going to operationalize a corporate city state where there's 15-minute cities, there's surveillance, there's not really money, it's programmable credit at the country store. And you could have that intercepted by a third party, right? Like where it says, your carbon credits are up for this month, you don't get whatever you want, using carbon. And so there's an interface between you and the exchange that is automatically inserted between that economic exchange, I guess is what I'm saying. So like, and that's
You had
like,
mentioned H.G. Wells earlier, 1984. That's
yeah,
where this is going.
right. You mean Orwell,
Yeah,
1984.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah. Well,
yes. It's
he H.G. Wells was doing a lot of crazy
HG.
stuff too, right?
Well, the same time period, different
Yes,
books.
exactly. So yeah, so I think, yeah, we're hard up against it. If you like my motto for this year is real hope begins when illusions end. And I had a friend who was really interested in that Andes crash in 1972, where they ended up cannibalizing their, you know, friends, that they had been
Yes.
on the plane with. Maybe they weren't their friends, but and he was telling me in the book, he was kind of riveted with this scene, and he said, they're huddled around this radio that they've reconnected to work again. And they were listening up on the progress of the search, and they hear what the words that they would never want to hear ever is, it's been called off. So nobody's looking for them anymore. Okay, it's at that point, like I would argue that if they hadn't heard those words, their likelihood of surviving would have been zero, because they'd be sitting around waiting, getting more depleted, right? Their resources getting more depleted, their bodies getting more, worry and fear. But they realized at that point, when they heard the worst news that they could, that they had to take some action. And
Yeah.
I tell people, like, we're on our own. Don't expect the social influencers to come and
Yes.
help you.
Yes.
Don't expect the politicians to come and help you. It is you and me, which is why
Yeah.
I
That's
love
what
these.
I'm, not to be contrarian. That's kind of what I was like. So I have autism. Sometimes I miscommunicate my point, or I fly past it altogether. But that's yes, nobody's coming to save us, and that's
Right.
essentially what my point is. And I don't mean to say like none of this is real, it's all fake. And what I really want to impress upon people is we don't really have to play this game if we don't want to. And the government control the cell phones, the social credit scores, and all that
Mhm.
stuff. Like, eventually, there may come a time where we might have to pay closer attention to that. But what I would like to do is educate people and talk to people and have conversations like this so people really understand what's happening, so we don't
Right.
have to play these games anymore. And
Right.
the governments that we look up to, like, they really don't matter much. They really don't.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And you got to get ready for it, because it's gonna, whatever, whether it's their system of kind of imploding the former control grid to bring in a new one, it's going to bring chaos, because that's how they
Yes.
always. Okay, so whether we implode the system, or by some resistance, start to wake up and pull out, right, where it's going to implode. But hard times are coming, right, and people have to realize that it's not, we're not getting out of this. It's like you've let your house get taken over by termites, rotted on the inside, and then you're like, it's going to collapse, right? So you have to try to make another outlet, right? or
I'm the
or
accelerationist that'd rather just push the house down so I
yeah,
can
no,
use what's left.
I think there may be some, like, I like the ending of the Lord of the Rings, right? Like they send the hobbits out and they're in the back door, and then they provoke the confrontation in the front, right?
Yes.
And they don't even know if the hobbits are alive, right? They don't. And they're like, there's a small band, and we're just going to make this fuss. We're going to create this fuss in front of the main gate so that Sauron turns his eye away from the backside, and perhaps by some miracle of God, you know what I mean, we get, blessed with some sort of, action on the backside. And so I think what you're saying is, by pushing up their timetable and disrupting the plans that they tend to have laid out well in advance, it could actually help us a little bit. But
Yeah.
expect to go through it regardless.
Yeah, and I've talked about it on the podcast as well. Like when all this happens, millions of people are going to die.
Yeah.
And we talk about Chicago, the Chicago World's Fair. I'll use Chicago as an example. There's not just in the little city that I live in, there's less than 100,000 people that lives here. In Chicago, there's millions. And what happens when Chicago runs out of food?
Right. Right.
There's not even enough. In New York City, there's more rats than people. They'll be eating rats, and and it's heartbreaking. But what do I do about it? You know, the best thing I can do is try to tell those people, leave New York,
Mm-hmm.
spread out. We don't, we can't purchase a lot of land, but um, the one thing that the hippies had, like little communes and stuff like that, I think eventually that's all going to come back. I don't. AI may be the disruptor that ends up, like bulldozing this whole thing down. I don't know, but I see the computer. The computer I don't see is as a disruptor at all. If you look at how the world was before the computer, and how the world, like the jobs, I mean, if you look at how the employment world was before computers and how it was after, it just got bigger. It didn't disrupt anything. It
Mm-hmm.
just it in made it bigger. The thing about AI that worries me is that these tech billionaires and geniuses may understand that if they don't have people that have money that can purchase all the products that AI is making, eventually it'll crash. But the billionaires have their own bunkers. They have they're ready for this to happen. So is that what they're really doing? Is a great reset, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, right, they always, I mean, like the world wars brought in a different system, right? They tried to bring in the League of Nations, then that didn't work on our side, and then it did somewhat, and we Rockefellers did fund that a lot, as I understand it. But then then we did get the United Nations, and now we're like, Trump is almost like segueing to a board of peace, which that's interesting. Is if something like that is going to ascend over, like,
Well,
come out of this end of this World
if you
War
want to know
Three.
what happened, the rules-based international order that worked until it didn't. Until Russia and China broke containment, the rules-based international order worked. So I really think that's long and short of it. I think that's what happened, and I think that's where we're at right now. Is um, the major powers that aren't the United States and that aren't Europe figured out that the rules based international order was bullshit from the very beginning.
So, like you have these international issues, and what can the little guy do, right? To affect those. Is, I guess, that's why I'm doing what I do. It's a small little pebble thrown onto the ocean, right? And saying, okay, in my little universe of people, can I, we desperately need to know history. We desperately need to know something more about economics, historical, longitudinal viewpoints, so we can kind of triangulate where we have what resources we have, and where the power is amassed against us. You know what I mean? And a
Absolutely.
reality check. And so, trying to convince as many people, or just show them, point them to these things. You have to go, like, I'm trying to connect the dots, and anywhere I do that, I'll give you the resources that you could go to. Go
Yes.
read
Yes.
Thorsten Veblen. Go read Burley and Means, who wrote The Private Corporation, or The Modern Corporation and Private Property. Go read that. They were saying early on, go read. Brady wrote Business as a System of Power in World War II. That as soon as they got monopolies, they would create cartels, associations. This is right around World War II, and once that happened, I mean, it was done. There was too much power there. So, learn about those things, and by God, teach your kids, because you put a cell phone in their hand. You know what I mean? You put a cell phone in their hand. As soon as you do that, you're allowing that that entity that will try to take their mind. You know what I mean? And
I
and
think
we're
it's
gonna.
already happened. If you ever tried to talk to a young person past like 5 minutes, it's horrible. If they don't have a screen in front of them, they can't
We can't have a
talk.
conversation, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm sensing that they don't really have a sense of humor either. They've lost that. No, yeah, I mean, like you joke with them, and they go, you
Yeah,
know
they don't understand it.
it's kind of odd.
They don't understand context. They don't understand. It is odd. It's very, very odd. So my kids didn't have social media.
Mhm.
That's really the only thing that they weren't allowed to have is social media. They're all screen addicted, but I'm screen addicted. But
Mhm.
when we go out to dinner, like one of the things that I do is like I make them order their own food. My 6 year old has to order his own food
Yeah.
because he has to have that face to
Talk.
face interaction. And the reason why I do that is because like a long time ago, when my 23-year-old was 17, we took her out to lunch. And if you're listening, hun, I'm sorry. But we took her out to lunch. We went to Taco Bell. She couldn't order her own food.
Mhm.
She's like, Dad, can you order for me? And I was like, why? Why? What's the matter? And she's like, I'm nervous. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what are you nervous about? That's a Taco Bell employee. Just go up there and order your
Right.
food, man. Like they're paid to listen to you. Just
Mhm. Just do it.
and it was very odd when I noticed that. I started looking around at other kids, and I started my 22-year-old at the time, he was 16. He really didn't know how to talk to people, but he was doing a lot better than my daughter was. And the reason that my daughter had access to social media and my boys didn't.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of things there that I had to internalize that. Okay, why is this happening? Why is that happening? And now that my 22-year-old son has access to social media, he's not on it all the time.
Mhm.
He's not on it 24/7. He's not going to social media to get his news. He really doesn't give a shit about news. He cares about his friends, his girlfriend, his kids, his job. He cares about the things in his immediate circle.
Mhm. Mhm.
When I try to tell people about politics, and people are all up in arms about national politics is a big deal to people. And while it is a big deal now, it's because people ignored their local politics. It's
Mhm.
because people didn't understand that local goes out, and how we control the national government is we
Right.
control our local government. Representative democracy is in um each section of the United States, we all have representatives, and those representatives are local. So if you make sure that your local representative is actually representative of your local people and your local population, we should be fine. And it's just not that way anymore.
Right. Yeah.
People have forgotten that.
Right. I mean, as the national state increases, the local civil service, right, as a national welfare state, the local civic society essentially
Yeah.
is destroyed. And so there are no local leaders except for politicians. And then a lot of times you can't even trust those because it takes so much money to get elected. You know what I mean? And
Right.
so
And see,
they're
that's where the Trump administration is. If you look at the Trump administration as a whole, there's a lot there. I'll give you that. There is a lot of there, but the Department of Education is part of that. The Department of Education is absolutely part of that. When is the last time you saw a civics class as part of a curriculum? I
yeah, but
haven't
so
seen
so
it
like
in.
so for example, though, if you go back researching wise, and the power company was put on the stands in like the 1920s, and they were going into and rewriting the textbooks to be pro private monopoly, right? You couldn't have public, we couldn't have the like telegraph or the Ma Bell taken over by public,
Ma
right?
Bell, that's a
but but
great,
but
that's a great,
they basically hired people literally to go through textbook by textbook, find the offending things, take out all the allusions to watered stock and the way they were kind of screwing the people with inflating the capitalization and asking for more, like inflating the cost so that they get more money out of the utility. And so they understood at the turn of the century that the textbooks were absolutely critical. And so, and I would submit to you, so you have like um the textbooks being written up until like I would say the late 1900s as America the Great, the mythology and corporate ascendance. Okay, so America corporations, America the Great. Okay, then you have this quote unquote, which out of nowhere comes with this cultural Marxist takeover, a leftist version of of infiltrates the education system. Right? Why is that? They're producing global citizens.
yeah,
Okay, they're already pre-pro. They've already for about 25 years, and they're doing it worldwide too with the SDGs, right? Those sustainable development goals. They're going all infiltrating India, Africa, all over the world with this idea that you need to be a global citizen because the world is sick. You know what I mean? And we're gonna have to. It's a collective, and in a sense, they're right. But I think for different reasons, right? Like they're
right.
using that as a, so they understood, like the powers that be understood the textbooks and the socialization. This is anything new, and we're not going to stop. We're not going to stop. We're not going to stop. I would differ from you that whatever Trump is doing, it's a a toss to the base. Essentially, they're not going to stop what they're doing with whatever
No,
controlling
no,
education.
that's why I agree. That's where I agree with you. That one of the things that I struggle with is like how to challenge my ideas and how to challenge my thinking. That's one of the things that I struggle with greatly. And one world government, like I have to challenge my thinking on that. Why is one world government bad?
Um, I think that the centralization of everything, when you think of monopoly, like the ownership and centralization of all the peoples is like a totalitarian system, in the hands of the wrong people, right? And we already know that, like, the powers that are running the world aren't really, you know what I mean, in the
Right,
best hands, right? And
right.
so once you give that absolute power, I mean, I would rather see, nations with different cultures and different, you know what I mean, just like you're saying, what, like local, we have to support local, we have to be, be
Absolutely.
unique to yourself. And like I use this example a lot. I say, okay, the local culture before the penny press, when the ideas permeated out and attacked that local, I call it a walnut. It was very self-reinforcing. Indigenous people are self-reinforcing. They don't have outside input, and
Right.
they continue on centuries at a time in the same way. And I use the Amish people, right? They unplugged. They don't put electricity
Yes.
to their houses, and yet they maintained what is like almost an 18th century lifestyle in the midst of dramatic cultural transitions. and yet were able to do it, which is amazing, right? So like if you unplug from that bombardment from outside, there's a hope there. But I mean, the centralization of all like look at cars, they all look like CRVs now,
Yeah.
right? They all just
Yes.
so think about human beings. They're all going to look, and all the communities are going to look like corporate mini malls, or it's all going to look alike. It already is. You start driving around the country now, it's not really unique to regions anymore. It all looks the same. So I guess for that reason, like I would say, yeah, I understand what you're saying, right? Because theoretically you're like, but in order to solve some of these problems, we sort of have to work together. We wouldn't a loose federation of people who agreed to work together better than a functioning sort of
Right.
top down authoritarianism, which would ultimately, I think, for sure get rail,
And I think
subverted.
that's where we were post World War II
A federation.
until Russia and China broke containment. And that's how like I have to I have to argue with myself, and like I said just a little while ago, it's really hard to say these things without sounding like an asshole. And what I'm doing is I'm just thinking out loud and trying to challenge my ideas in real
Yeah.
time,
Mm-hmm.
because like the way I feel about these things and the way I feel about the United States is oh, okay, these things are happening, but like if we can't stop them, like how do we make them better? How do we challenge these things? How do we make how do we progress? How do we move on? Like
Yeah.
once we understand what's going on, what do we do?
Yeah. But
And
the more people, okay, go ahead.
that's where I struggle with, like I don't know. I don't know what the answers are. And I also don't understand all of these manipulation tactics. I don't know what I'm supposed to believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think like the reason I made my first book with a study guide is so that people literally, and I stayed away from anything left and right that would trigger people, right?
Right.
Like I try to not go into any current events that would cause people to like, okay, this offends me, so that people could sit down, or you could sit down with your kids and you could go over chapter one, you could talk about it, go, like uncover history that you didn't know, start to talk about the implications of that, because I address like free speech, whether we actually have, when you have this sort of monopolization of the communication system and all the money that you just have centralized aggregations of money that are really really vast. Anybody can buy anything, which is what this quote we started with, you know, a while ago. It's like, well, they brag that they can do anything. So and then you talk about that, and you realize, hey, you're starting to create that local community with different ideology, and you're starting to build the walnut back up, right? So like we don't that's local culture, family, right? Whether it's church or spiritual um connections, right? um that's so important. It resists the outside forces coming in, and we have to rebuild that again. And there's no easy way. There's no easy way except for like place by place, people by people, families by
Well,
families, communities by communities.
the first step is identifying that there's a problem, right?
Yeah, right. Well, there you go. There you go.
I think
Yeah.
that's, you know what? I think this is a great place to wrap up this
Mm-hmm.
conversation. But Michelle, let me listen. I've got to have you back on. I just have to, because this has been a great conversation, and like for I know that I know what self-deprecation is, but listen, the physical therapy aspect of what you're doing, like I believe that's important too. So I appreciate the thought and nuance that you've put into this conversation. I appreciate the thought and the nuance that you put into your book, but don't discount yourself because you're just a physical therapist. I was talking in our messages. I'm actually going through physical therapy for a shoulder injury.
Oh,
So
right. Yeah.
it's one of those things, like I'm not just a podcaster. My
Yeah, I hear
favorite
you.
the favorite thing about my life is I'm a dad, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
and that's why this conversation is so
Matters.
important.
Yeah.
It absolutely does, because without future generations understanding where we came from, how are they going to know where the we're going? You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and it's 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 scary. I worry about my kids every day. I worry about my
Mhm.
grandkids every day.
Yeah.
And Michelle,
Yeah.
I want to appreciate, I want to tell you, I appreciate from the bottom of my heart the work and the sacrifice that you put into this book, and for all of us. And I appreciate this conversation. I appreciate you coming and hanging out with us and sharing with my audience. Where can everybody find your book?
Well, my book is on Amazon and it's also at my website, which is Smart Sheep with an E. So SHEEPE.com. So smartsheep.com. And I'm on Substack. And so if you're interested in the new book, which should be coming out shortly here, I'm just chunking away at trying to get some social media going again. And so that I can launch this thing properly. But yeah, that's how you could, get the original book and a study guide, and sit down with your kids or friends or family, and start talking about this stuff and get the conversation going. It isn't really hard once you get going. And
Yeah, and you'll know,
again,
I think you'll
yeah.
find out that everybody else is just as fascinated as we are.
Yeah, so I really appreciate your comments, and but it's been just something that I felt like I needed to do, and so there you go. You just follow that purpose, and you throw your rock, and you trust God the rest of the way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Amen. Thank you very much. Michelle Stiles, everybody. Hang
Okay.
out with me for just a moment. We'll let everybody go. And everybody, hey, we'll see you next time. Bye.